any questions about the presentations? If not, I have some of my own. Oh, go right ahead, up here.
Yeah, but just from the last presentation, really interesting. But I was just kind of wondering, is there
Give me the mic.
like product integration with EDR, like beyond AV, but actual true EDR, XDR? Is that in the pipeline somewhere?
Yeah, when you ask the questions, we ask you to use the microphone because they're all being recorded, and it doesn't get recorded if you don't use the microphone.
Oh, sorry about that.
It's just the noise in the room then. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
The question was, beyond AV, are you thinking about product integration with EDR, XDR? Like, will these systems start showing up, and as the consumer, I'm going to be able to plug them into my EDR console and get monitoring, or like, is that on the roadmap?
So from a vendor perspective, yes, as we build our systems and stuff, but that's something we certify more at the system level. What's nice about this is it works across, right? Like, how do you build EDR into an AV, right? Like, you're just scanning files at the end of the day. But yes, in our actual control systems, we are looking at that, but I'll let Pete kind of answer from a...
Yeah, so from a product perspective, we package up to 30 different engines, and some of those do include like EDR, MDR type services, so like the CrowdStrikes and others. So
Do they have to get closer to the microphone? Just a question. So, I forget now, I'm sorry, it's the end of the day, but somebody told me stand back from one microphone and the other one's to go close. I don't remember which. I think I'm supposed to stand back. Okay,
yeah, and I'd
fine.
certainly love to chat after on your thoughts on where you see that fitting in the big equation that we just went through.
And I get, sorry, I'm hogging this, but for the AV scanning and the 30 different engines, do you also do any kind of detonation, or is it just like, file comparison stuff?
Yeah, so we do. We have a couple of technologies built in. One is CDR, where we'll actually just trust none of the files by default and simply rebuild them all from scratch, making sure that nothing, in a PDF or other type of file doesn't make it through, right? We know what should be in there, and that's a great way to detect, 0 days, so things don't look right, like that PDF just doesn't look like we're going to rebuild it. And then we've got some other technologies in the roadmap for integration. So some of our sandboxing technologies we recently acquired, we're going to start building those into core so you can do some of the detonation in a safe, containerized space, for example.
Should I give the Fortinet answer?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, please.
Yeah, we already have that in play already. 40 EDR, 40 XDR as well, and we have a sandbox. I mean, in several flavors. One that can exist in a self-contained environment, access to the cloud, and another one that can be virtual as well. So yeah, these are things I think as an industry as a whole, we're looking at that solution as well. It's not exclusive to one particular vendor.
But let me just ask a question to follow up
Yes.
to you. The one thing that I see difference between OpSWAT and Fortinet in this case, OpSWAT's really focusing on the scanning, the AV,
Yep.
not the AV, not malware detection within the endpoint, but it's kind of pre-loading. And I don't know does Fortinet have a product for that? Maybe you do, and I don't know.
We do, and in fact, the technology behind EDR is mostly mathematical in nature. So you have to do that first. Compared to what is there, run it by the equation against knowns and unknowns, and then start looking at the possible effects. And you can do that on a preload basis as well. So yeah, that's where the industry is going. We do have a particular implementation of our EDR product that is specific to OT, and in fact, we've been looking at headless devices. How do we protect headless devices? So those are things that are coming in the future as well.
No, thank you.
Does that answer your question? Any other questions? There's one in the back.
Good afternoon. I'm Stuart Madnick from Cybersecurity Center at MIT, and I came in a few minutes late, so I may have missed it at the very beginning. My question is, many of you talked about things you should do to prevent a cyber attack. The question, are you aware of any successful cyber attacks, and in what way did the prevention fail? And what could have been done about it?
I have a whole litany of
Yeah.
success.
There is a pretty long list out there.
Where do we start?
Well, no, the reason I ask is I've talked to many people. The first thing they say is, our lawyers say nothing. And so in general, when I talk to people, I've talked to insurance companies, who actually insure the companies, and they say many of them don't tell us, and what they tell us is very little. So I'm curious, maybe you've been much more successful at hearing the information, because it's not available easily.
I'll pick an industry.
So I'll take a shot first, and I'll speak in very broad generalities for lots of reasons. I think first, and Carlos talked about this in his presentation this morning, you have to start with defense in depth. One technology is not going to save you ever, right? Secondly, if you do not have MFA in place, you should be doing that right now. I can think of several instances in the past of incidents where I've worked that MFA would have stopped them cold, because attackers, for the most part, are looking for a path of least resistance. Now, sometimes that's not true for OT specifically, especially if you're in critical infrastructure. We're going to have more sophisticated attackers. For the most part, they're looking for the least amount of friction. They're going to spam, they're going to password spray. Whenever they get hit, they're going to attack, right? Put MFA in front of it. I would say the other thing that has been most beneficial is have some type of logging and alerting. A lot of people don't do that, and you'd be surprised at numbers that don't. Because one, if you get the alert, you're going to stop it. And I'll give you a real world example of that. We had an alert one day where, and this happened to be a red team attack, where we were in the middle of a pen test. A user called me and said, "Hey, I just got an alert that my password was changed and I approved it. And should I have done that?" Well, no, he shouldn't have. He had just moved, and it was just perfect confluence of events, right? He had moved the day before. He was in a new spot. He wasn't sure how things were set up, and he assumed that he had done the right thing. Well, he called me. We immediately went and closed off his account. If that would have been a real attacker, they still would have been in our network for 30 minutes, right? But those are the types of things that when you have those in place, you're going to lessen the risk. And I'm sorry to jump in all over that.
Oh, no, you're good. I mean, and I think the other part of that is always people, right? Like, I mean, even just simple malware stuff, right? Like most of the malware attack, and sometimes it's like gaming password collectors and banking Trojans show up in my control systems. They're not going to do anything. They're just going to sit there and just sit there. But, they got in there because no one bothered to actually, I mean, these things are like decades old, right? Like any virus scan you had ran would have caught it, but people didn't. And then I would say the same thing on your social engineering with MFA, right? Like MFA is great if you then have a process to call a phone number to bypass that MFA and you don't have good security, good controls there, your MFA isn't as effective as you think it is, right? So I think people are always still one of the largest, control attack vectors that we still have to work on. And that's why when you have solutions that kind of go back and check behind them, right? If you have a virus scanning tool that then prevents them from actually introducing files that weren't signed by the original scanning tool, right? That helps prevent people from just making mistakes, right? If you've ever been a control engineer at a commissioning site, right? You're on day 30 of 16 hours of almost straights, right? And it's real easy to make a mistake at that time zone. It's real easy to just pull that USB stick you found on the, in the parking lot and plug it in, and not just mistakenly thinking it's the one you had certified. So.
Well, and the other thing is, and I'll leave it at this for me, so many people can focus at times on EDR, XDR, DLP, what are we doing at the network for decryption? That's all great. Get the basics first.
Yeah.
Asset management. Do you know what's on your network? Are you protecting what's on your network, right? Do that. AV, asset management, AV, MFA. Those three things, 90% of the way there, in my opinion.
Yeah. For the most part, unless you're being targeted by a syndicate or somebody that knows where the family jewels are hidden, the hacker is going to do exactly as the word says. They're going to hack away until they find a way in and find where you're hiding the family jewels. How do they do that? Very simple. The initial stage of a hack, other than the fact that it's extremely boring, because all you do is a lot of recon. The first thing you do is you create a little bit of an incident within the network and the environment to see what your team is going to do. Immediately the team moves and start protecting a particular sector. That's what the bad guys are going to go after. Did I say me? That's what happens, right? But that's exactly what they're gonna go after. If you like it, is a trash can fire. If there was a fire in this room right now, everybody will grab whatever is most important to them and run out that door because of a trash can fire. Exactly the exact same thing with a hacker. Light up a trash can fire in the environment and see what you go after and protect. Then now I know what I'm gonna go after. And frankly, once you're inside, if you have that level of visibility, finding how to bypass your protection mechanisms is really simple. And like Ben says, it's all about process and people. That part is really simple. So it really isn't. Now, to your very first question, what it doesn't make the news, there's a lot of it that don't make the news.
Yeah. Most of it.
And you're not gonna tell him either,
Buy me a beer, and I'll tell you.
which is what Stuart wants.
I'll tell you hypotheticals.
Yeah. Yeah, you can talk about that now.
Any other questions there? All right, well, I've got a couple questions. Ben and Carlos, your presentation, now Ben's presentation was really, CPS, the systems you're managing there are really more IT-ish.
Correct.
And this is an OT conference, so, but I know Ben has some background in OT type of systems as well. So I'm just curious, as a CISO, do you feel that most CISOs, IT CISOs, are prepared to deal with the OT challenges? There's a big trend today, for CISOs to get involved in OT, which is probably good, maybe more governance and stuff. But do they really know what they're doing? I mean, I can just picture an IT CISO coming in and say, you have to do all these things which aren't applicable to the world, or you aren't necessarily can do them. I'm just wondering how prepared you think they are.
So I will probably give you a non-traditional answer. I was reading an article, I wish I could quote, I wish I could give attribution now. Some of the most successful CISOs today aren't technical and maybe don't even have a background in cybersecurity. They know how to manage people, they know how to manage processes, and they know how to engage with customers. I would say for me specifically, if you put me in an OT environment today, I would be successful, but here's what I would do. I would go in, I'd listen. I'd talk to those around me who know what the heck they're doing. Because if I think that I'm gonna go into an environment I've never been in before and make substantive changes, no, I'm ignorant, right? Go teach me. Now, there are people that are arrogant enough to go in and say, well, you don't have X, Y, Z, therefore you're gonna go do it. And they're gonna be like, well, we're gonna break our systems. Oh, that's stupid. Well, those people have a lot to learn, and that learning is gonna be a hard path in their future, right? So I think it's a mixed bag. I think it depends on the personality of the people. I think it depends on the personality of the CISO, and I think it depends on whether or not they're willing to listen and be led by the people around them.
Anybody else have a comment on that?
I'd say they come with tremendous experience from the IT side, and I think Echo, they need to be open to understanding the OT, because lots of the same techniques, but they're certainly going to understand like SOCs and firewalls much better than the OT side. So it's really people who can understand systems at a high level is really what kind of the world is missing. So people who came up through the admin space are kind of invaluable, and those are the people you need to partner with as a CISO.
A question now for Jeremy and Pete. I really like the comment you made. It's one of those things that goes, just background. I'm a big believer that, OT systems, one of the things that is kind of a hallmark is that there's a lot of devices and networks that you cannot protect because the technology is too old. Like you mentioned that one with the DOS system. You're just not going to be able to do it. So what you have to do is keep the bad things away from it. So, and sometimes I think people discount that because a lot of people focus a lot about the internal networks, detecting things, which is all great. But it seems to me you have to first start by saying, got to do everything I can to keep things away. And I liked your whitelisting comment because a lot of times, because even when they do have the whitelisting and they can put it in, they go and they disable it, and then you load the file because you don't have these processes in place to check it beforehand. You put it in, and then it learns that it says, oh, okay, this is one of the valid tasks, and so it runs it. So I'm just, I guess my question, it was more of a comment than a question, but what my question would really be, do you see it the same way that I just wrote a paper, and it was with OpSWAT, but it was about OpSWAT's products. But the thing that I kind of realized as I was writing it had to do with, you have to think this way about protecting the outside first. You have to do the basics. And I think Ben said the same thing too about doing the basics. Don't forget the basics. You can get overwhelmed with the new things. And is that kind of your guys' view?
Yeah,
Would
that's
you
very
comment on
much
that?
my experience is 90% of the control failures are when people just forgot to do the simple basics, right? I mean, if we look at the Colonial Pipeline, right? Like it was a VPN that they totally forgot about and didn't change passwords, right? Like, I mean, it's just, that tends to be what brings OT systems down and stuff is like, it's a simple failure and a basic control. It's nothing fancy. I mean, these systems aren't fancy, right? Like you don't have to be fancy to take down these systems. So
Yep.
like,
Open
basics go
protocols.
I mean, the protocols are all open, right? Like all that kind of stuff. So like, it just, doing the basics is the most important because sometimes it's the only thing you can do. And, you know, I mean, we're never going to design, I mean, like, it's just not cost effective to design a board, an IO board to run antivirus, right? Like, I mean, on the board itself, like, it's not a cost effective to do it. And so like, we're not. And so you got to protect it before it gets there.
You have the same thing about the basics, doing the basics?
Yeah, I think absolutely when you nail the basics. One thing that I would add to what I said earlier about the foundations are, and this is something in IT we think about a lot. I don't have the OT experience to say that, and I'd love your opinion, is identity and access management. And, you know, provisioning, deprovisioning. That's the basics right there. Are you giving people the right level of access? And when they leave, are you taking that access away? That is so simple, and it is the hardest thing you're going to do. So,
Yeah, I would say we hadn't thought a lot about. I think it's slowly starting, right? Like even at the OEM level, right? Like
Right.
we would build you a system, and there were 3 accounts on it, right? And all with passwords. And one of those accounts we probably kept to ourselves and didn't tell you it existed, and never changed the password. And everybody on our side knew that password, even the people we fired,
Right.
Right? And we didn't tell you we fired them, and they still have access to, you know, the God account within the control system. That has come a long, long way. I think NERC here in the States really kind of started that discussion between customers and vendors, and it's gone a long way since then, at least out of the electric utility side. We are very much now building, you know, role-based access controls into our systems, but, you know, and hooking them up into identity and access management solutions and stuff like, so it is getting there, but like, no, there's still a lot of passwords and user accounts out there that never get changed.
A lot of sticky papers.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah, a lot of sticky
Every
notes.
plant has
Yeah.
sticky.
I've walked
in
into
any
many
plant.
substations with username and password written.
I can tell you stories, but let me tell you, the best thing that happened on MFA is getting your token on the phone. Because we did have one of those occasions where they had the sticky note and the token right below it with the username and password. But what's funny is that, you know, people will surrender their token, but they will never surrender their phone. I'm not gonna say, here you go, man, use my phone and get my, that's not gonna happen. So I think that's one of the simplest things, that ever happened. I mean, put it on the phone.
Yeah.
But it really, avoid that situation.
I mean, there's a lot of reluctance in OT, you know, I mean, I'm sure you all know that, where people say, I don't want, a plant manager might say, I don't want this multi-factor, I don't want that kind of stuff because it's gonna keep somebody from doing something vital. And there's some validity in that, I'm not discounting that. But the other side of it is there's the other side of the coin that's being ignored here, I think.
sure.
So you have to protect that.
I think that my only comment there would be, every time you hear one of those, well, what about at 3 a.m. on July 4th weekend or whatever national holiday, we have to get in and that person's not there. You always have to have an answer for those corner cases. You know, I talked about that in my presentation about storytelling. You have to address those corner cases because even those corner cases may be 1% or 0.5% of the time that it's ever going to happen, they're really important to that person. And you have to find a way to address that to that person in order to achieve whatever your end goal is.
You know, I have a cute thing, I always tell a story, but my wife and I, this many, many years ago, we lived out in the country, and our house was burglarized. We had a little dog, and we used to leave the garage door open so the dog could run outside and come in. And we left it a little too much open, and we came home, And it was really funny, because it was a very nice burglar. We came home, and we didn't even know that we were robbed until my wife went to turn the TV on, and the TV was gone. And then we found some other stuff gone. But anyhow, so I don't know if anybody here has been burglarized, but it's a traumatizing experience. I mean, you know, you feel completely violated, you don't feel secure and all kinds of stuff. So we went out and we bought the most sophisticated security system you could find. You know, this was a long time ago, so it had sensors on the windows and all kinds of stuff, things that became a pain, so we started disabling them. And then we didn't even lock the damn doors. We never set up, my wife would never set the security system, so I was laughing because those are the basics I was asking about before. I mean, if you aren't going to use path, you got to have some basics in place, or all the other stuff is useless, right? Yeah. That's the way I see it. So.
I live in Texas, so we have a 12 gauge, and it comes to the house.
Well, but you got to be there.
Yeah.
You can't leave the
Comes to
door
the
open.
house, though.
But I always tell people, before you go and invest in a security system, first decide if you're going to lock your doors. If you aren't going to lock your doors, it's a waste of money, right?
You got a question, Sid?
Question, I think.
Got a question?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, please.
This kind of goes back to the IT versus OT. We had a customer that had a ransomware attack on their IT side, and then they turned around and imposed very similar restrictions on the OT side, which I mean, I'm confident this system is more secure now, but it also means that our service techs are less likely to log into their system and help them with their, their machinery diagnostics and things like that. So, how do you find the balance there? And one thing that kind of I wonder about here was the IT side. I think it's probably very easy to do you can target a lot of systems in an interconnected system, but on the OT side, machines are isolated. It's hard to target an entire company. You can target a machine perhaps, but so how do you balance those?
This is just a general question to everybody in the panel.
I'm a big fan of the consequence-driven analysis coming out of INL and that type of technique, where you really need to look at what a threat vector and kind of walk it through your system and see where it's really going to go. And then using that to implement your control strategy, right? And because what you said, it's really about balance, right? We're always trading off protection versus availability and ease of use in OT, right? I mean, it's great if you have a secure production line. If it's never running because of the security controls, everybody's without a job at that point, right? And so, like, that's always our balance. We always have to manage that, and that's why I really do like that consequence-driven analysis, because it really does help you think through. And it helps you combine the actual controls built into the control, right? There's some actual like IT protective controls built into the control logic a lot of times, right? Right? The system will fail safe. It's designed to fail safe, right? And you may be willing to put up with, a trip here and there over this box gets this one box, this controller gets a virus on it and it crypto locks, right? Like, maybe I'm willing to trade off that 2-hour outage to rebuild that box as long as I have enough control, enough, safety systems and stuff to like prevent catastrophic failure in the physical world, right? So we're constantly balancing that. And so you really do, that's my advice, is just figure out what the real consequences are before you go rushing in to put controls in, so.
Yeah, not that it's impossible, but if you think about ransomware, one of the core tenets of it is it has to phone home, right? Usually has to phone home to some wild address that if your OT has access to that wild address, you've done so many other things wrong, you have like giant problems, right? And then to echo what Jeremy said, ransomware spreads via pretty well-known avenues, right? It's either SMB or some other, generally speaking, Windows-ish thing that you probably shouldn't have that turned on in OT. Most of your vendors don't need NFS or CIFS file shares set up on those endpoints. So if you stop it from spreading and God forbid something comes in, with a technician who didn't scan it with 8 engines or something, it's just going to encrypt that workstation. It's probably not going to be able to phone home, and now you're just hopefully going back from an image-based restore. So it's ransomware is obviously all the rage, but in OT you have to think about it realistically and implement your controls from stopping it to spread, right?
Let me ask Carlos, because you made a comment about how everything's isolated, something can't spread. What do you find? Because I hear a lot where people will tell me how they'll go into a plant and they'll find it's a completely flat network. Amazingly, it's not like people haven't been told not to do that, but that's the way the world is. And I'm just curious if you find that very much. I think they're more mature, but you saw my presentations where they're not all that mature.
There are some systems that they warrant to be totally isolated, like safety systems, right? You don't want, like, if you're offshore, you don't want the man overboard system to be, to be vulnerable, to somebody going out, and next thing you see some dude coming, 18 stories down. So some systems, they do require that level of, that level of isolation. However, having, visibility of those systems can be done securely as long as safety is enforced. And safety, I'm talking here human safety, that's something of that nature. So to your question earlier, to what extent do you see OT being locked down? Relative to IT, I think ultimately it comes to if we leave this open and we don't do anything about it and we don't put any controls, is anybody going to get hurt?
Yeah.
Right, people are not going to. If you can make that determination and reduce the risk to the point that okay, cool. We can open this up and everybody can do their work, well, nobody's going to get hurt.
Yeah.
By all means,
Yeah.
whatever makes sense to the business. You have the agility to do your work, or the guys from IT help the guys on the OT side. But if it's going to be it's going to be a case where safety is jeopardized, then somebody's going to have to pout and say, no, these are the controls that are in place, and go to town.
Yeah, but do you also, but what my question was,
Oh, yeah,
what
yeah.
I was getting was, do you find, because you're Fortinet, and do you find when you go and install or do assessments and help companies upgrade their systems, like CPS was saying?
Yeah.
What Ben was talking about was starting from a system that was pretty much flat, was not segmented, and implementing segmentation. And I was just saying that because your comment, and I would assume, I would hope systems are like that, but unfortunately, I hear all these stories where they're not.
We see the whole gamut. We see the whole gamut from
Plenty of flat networks.
and companies that you think that they're so sophisticated. Large multinationals. You think that these guys. They're probably segmented to the bone. Nope. Totally flat networks.
Especially in manufacturing, you'll see it. I think a lot of it's somewhat industry specific too, right? Like, you'll see it a lot in manufacturing because they were one of the first users of data to build into their MES systems for just in time, right? Like, data was critical there, and it got it right. Like, whereas in the electrical network system, it was like you have a bunch of things talking over serial protocols that concentrate to one thing that sends out over a private point network, on a fraction of an ISDN line, right? Like that was the technology where you were, until like 5 years ago, right? We still have substations that look like that, right? So, I think it's really industry specific to what you see, so.
I think the difference really is with the IT, you could shut down a company's entire order system, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They could not receive any more orders until they pay the ransom.
Yeah.
Whereas, you could shut down one machine in Ohio on the OT side, right? You could actually, you don't even need a flat network to shut down that machine. You just need to target
That one machine.
piece of the process that shut down the entire machine. But you're not going to shut down the machine in Texas, right?
Correct.
So,
Yeah.
Hey, take the power
Okay,
out,
maybe
right?
I know what you're talking about, okay. Michelle?
But we'll go back through to the question. You guys all talked about the basics. We've all generalized about the basics. What are they? And which ones would you prioritize?
Yeah, I was gonna ask a similar question, so.
No,
good
really,
question.
that's a really valid question. The first thing is, who needs to be in that system? A lot of times, or more often than not, we assign access to systems to people that they don't need it. And I know you made a point about that, and Ben as well. Role-based access controls. I mean, do you have the need to be in that system? Start from there. And then simple things like controls, password control, password management. It's really simple. Yeah, there are some other controls that go after that. Controls that go more in the sense of doing some more analysis and seeing what the activities are, being a little bit more, even be predictive in nature by looking at the past behavior. I mean, that's the foundation of ML, right? That can be done, but the foundation is lock the door. That's simple.
Well, yeah, know where your doors are.
Yep.
Right? Lock them, and then know what's behind what is the value of those assets behind, right? Like, what are you protecting? You need to really understand that about your system. What are your crown jewels within your system? What are the systems that really, really matter versus the ones that are just kind of ancillary?
I was going to give, CISA a shout out, a bit of a cliched answer, but there are dozens of standards around the world. We'll just pick on this CSF because CISA was here. Start there, and you are 98% of the way to keeping yourself out of trouble, right?
I'll give a little bit more succinct answer. Access management, including MFA where appropriate. Asset management, know what you have. Antivirus and some type of network protection. Including in network protection for your workforce is some type of spam and phishing control. Those right there get you a long ways towards the rest.
We forgot user education.
Yeah. What?
Education, user
What?
education.
No.
Any other questions? All right, because we're the session before the beer, so I don't want to belabor things. I'm tired myself, to be honest, but I don't want to belabor it and keep anybody from refreshments or getting a chance to get a little rest. So if you would, I'd like to thank everybody on the panel and in the presentations today, and I think it was a wonderful session, so thank you very much. And don't forget the survey. I think I mentioned that this morning, but if you look on our app, this forum app, if you go to this session, you can click and it's 2 simple questions, okay? There's a little star on the upper side of the session. Just click it, and it's going to ask you 2 questions. What did you think of the session? What do you think of the speakers? And then we'll get some feedback. So thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Hope you didn't mind me cutting it off.